We've talked of how passions have run high here in France in the last 3 weeks since the Middle East erupted. Every word from politicians gets scrutinized for signs of favoritism. In Russia, a clear-cut line, what with the foreign ministry last week welcoming a Hamas delegation and the Kremlin blaming the war with Gaza on U.S. imperialism, a throwback to the days when the Soviets championed the Palestinian cause. Has the messaging been too effective? An angry mob last Sunday overrunning the tarmac in the Muslim-majority Russian Republic of Dagestan. They'd caught wind of a flight in transit from Tel Aviv and were searching for Israelis. Why the anger? We'll ask about Moscow blaming the incident on Ukraine, whose Jewish president was among the first to denounce the October 7th massacre by Hamas. In the nearly 2 years since Vladimir Putin's invasion, Israel's given Russia a wide berth as part of a quid pro quo. Moscow stays silent when the Israelis bomb Iran-aligned militias in Syria, and the Israelis stay out of it in Ukraine and continue to welcome Jewish oligarchs. Now, are all bets off? And more broadly, how does the Middle East impact a former Soviet space that's home to both Jews and Muslims? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about Putin's Israel dilemma. With us, Vladislav Davidson, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Your latest book is in stores soon, The Birth of a Political Nation, Jews and Ukrainians since 2013. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me back, Francois. Yeah.
We're also joined from Prague, North Caucasus watcher, Emil Aslan Suleimanov, professor at Charles University. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
From Istanbul, Ekaterina Sokiryanskaya, founder and director of the Conflict Analysis and Prevention Center. Thanks for being with us. All right, we don't have the connection yet with Istanbul. We'll have it as soon as we can patch it in. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. No official condemnation, but there have been 80 arrests since the weekend, and Russia is tightening security in the Muslim-majority south. In neighboring Chechnya, the Kremlin-backed leader Ramzan Kadyrov this Tuesday quoted as ordering a bullet in the forehead if suspected rioters don't respond to warning shots. Kathy Kadir-Clifford has more on what happened in Dagestan.
Armed with Palestinian flags and anti-Semitic slogans, hundreds stormed the airport in Dagestan's capital as a flight from Tel Aviv landed there on Sunday evening. Some rushed onto the runway and surrounded the plane. In this majority Muslim republic of the Russian Federation, there's been anger over the Israeli bombardment on Gaza. Security services shut down the airport and cleared it. Around 20 people were injured in the riots, but the passengers inside the plane were safe. On Monday, the Russian Foreign Ministry's spokeswoman described a provocation orchestrated from outside Russia, with Ukraine playing a direct and key role. Accusations that Kyiv denies, saying Russia is trying to shift responsibility away from deep-rooted anti-Semitism.
These riots were inspired by those who repeatedly resort to extremist and terrorist methods to destabilize the internal political situation in Russia.
A sentiment echoed by presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who said Putin was holding a meeting to discuss, quote, the West's attempts to use events in the Middle East to divide Russian society. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has demanded action from Russia against incitement to violence against Jews and Israelis. Members of Moscow's Jewish community are deeply concerned.
It's terrifying, of course, that people can attack for no reason all of a sudden. That's scary. I had no idea what I should do.
Russia's Federal Investigations Agency has ordered a criminal investigation. At least 60 people were detained in the unrest.
Emil Aslan, have you been able to piece together what exactly happened in Dagestan?
Well, apparently people were informed that there was a wave of Jews, like thousands of Jews willing to come and settle in the Republic of Dagestan. And part of the message was, as I understand it, that there was an Israeli plane that just landed in the airport of Makhachkala. So There were some communication on social networks, certain social networks with people gathering to kind of retaliate against the bad Jews, the bad Israelis for what's going on in Palestine. So that's in a nutshell what happened in Makhachkala. Obviously, what they did is what your reporter described: thousands of people sieging the airport, getting into the airport, and looking, getting close to the plane, and looking for Jews, chasing them down.
How do you explain what happened?
Sorry?
How do you explain what happened? Why did it happen?
Well, it's a long story. So we should be getting back to a couple of very important things. First of all, the background. Do you know that Dagestan has been home to an established Jewish community, the so-called mountain Jews? They are known as Kafkazim in Hebrew. This community has been living in Dagestan since time immemorial, centuries, and there have been no incidents of anti-Semitism, no pogroms whatsoever in the Republic of Dagestan, in the Caucasus, in general. And that's the background. Thankfully, most mountain Jews, they left Dagestan and the Northeast Caucasus in the 90s. So nowadays, there are some hundreds, probably 200, 300, 400 people of mountain Jewish descent still residing in the Republic of Dagestan. So that's just to give you an understanding that this is not a typical thing for this area to have Jewish pogroms. Another thing is the social fabric of Dagestani society. What's been going on in this republic is the rise of political Islam since the 90s. Because there is no political competition in the republic, there are no political parties that would seek for power, that would compete between each other. Salafi jihadists and this very specific form of political Islam has gained momentum as this revolutionary force. So those who are willing to challenge the corrupt and spoiled regime, who want to go against the spoiled morality of Dagestani society, they would self-identify with some form of political Islam. And Dagestan is facing serious problems when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to water shortages, bad governance, and so on. So, and the war in Ukraine, which has seen thousands of Dagestani males being killed and wounded in the course of the war. So all this together, along with the fact that Dagestanis cannot express their dissent against the policies of the Republican government or against the federal policies, has created a backdrop for an external enemy which has been kind of advanced by the federal government, by Moscow itself.
So better an external enemy than to have than to focus on those domestic problems that you've been spelling out. We can join now from Istanbul, Ekaterina Sokuryanskaya. You agree with Emil Aslan there that this is a partial surprise what happened in Dagestan?
No, to me it was a surprise actually, and I agree fully with Professor Aslan that we have never seen any anti-Jewish pogroms in Dagestan. We have never seen anti-Semitism as a problem, as any kind of serious problem. There is some background, this day-to-day type of anti-Semitism that is generally typical of Russian regions, maybe a bit higher in the Muslim regions, but they have never been violence, any kind of organized violence or aggression against Jews in Dagestan. That's one, to me, it's a surprise on the one hand. On the other hand, I again fully agree that all these factors, a region that is plagued by unresolved conflict, very bad governance, poor public services, and exactly this, so many people recruited to the front. This created frustrations, lots of frustrations. And clearly what we're seeing in this video is a crowd of angry youth.
A crowd of angry youth, and we've had the response from Russia's president saying that accusing Ukraine of rabble-rousing over social media upon orders, quote, of the ruling elites of the United States and their satellites that are the main beneficiaries of global instability, end quote.
We can only help Palestine in the fight against those who are behind this tragedy. We, Russia, are fighting them in the special military operation, precisely against them, both for ourselves and for those who strive for real, true freedom.
Vladislav Davidson, is that anti-Semitic, what we just heard?
Look, a sterile regime, a hollowed-out state that is not in control of its crumbling authority in the periphery, overextension in an imperial war that is going too far, lack of political competition, rest of local populations and elites unhappy, a czar that is not totally in control, seeing foreign ghosts and specters, creating instability, some sort of international cabal creating instability in his realm. Welcome back to the 19th century, baby, right? This is straight out of 1893, right? As a post-Soviet Jew, as a Ukrainian Jew, this is terrifying, but it's completely not unprecedented. I mean, any Russian Jew, any Ukrainian Jew, we watch this and we see imperial history unfolding, and it's terrible.
So let's talk about this, because on the one hand, he hasn't formally condemned what happened in Dagestan, but there's been a tightening of security. Is the Kremlin worried about what happened on Sunday?
They'd be foolish not to be worried. This is absolutely a problem for them. This is exactly the kind of thing that they cannot control. This is the only thing that probably at this point will create steam to blow up the regime. And this is historically how every Russian regime that has fallen over the last 400 years, with the exception of a few palace coups successfully, has fallen. This is historically what every Russian ruler and Russian autocrat has to be worried about, is uncontrollable crowds channeling the rage of the population. And of course, the Jews are usually the scapegoats for this kind of thing. And can I just say, as a Ukrainian, as a patriot, as a Jew, someone married to a Ukrainian Jewish woman, who this morning, when we heard the news again on the way back from Bulgaria from the elections, which I was observing, she turns to me and she said, "These people couldn't fight the Russian army when they came to pick up the young men to go kill us in Ukraine. This is displacement in the traditional psychological frame. You can't fight the Russian Amon when they come to arrest your young men and to throw them into meat waves against Ukrainian machine guns, but you can." Storm airport tarmac looking for Jewish devils. I mean, this is like, we're not your enemy. Like, the Russian regime is your enemy, and you should be fighting them, not us. You know.
Let's talk about Dagestan here for a second. Ever since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, it's been a balancing act handling minorities across Russia's 11 time zones. In September of last year, Dagestan saw protests against conscription into the army. Here you see some of those pictures. But then, in the aftermath of Yevgeny Prigozhin's aborted march on Moscow, it was also in Dagestan, where Vladimir Putin this past June decided to show his face first with meeting people from the crowd, something he doesn't usually do, leading some to wonder whether that what we're watching was staged or not. Ekaterina Sokoryanskaya, why is Dagestan so important? All right, we seem to have an audio problem there with Istanbul. We're going to try to fix that as soon as we can. Apologies, Ekaterina. I'll put it to you, Emil Aslan. Your thoughts when you see how Dagestan has made the news quite a few times since the beginning of what Vladimir Putin calls a special military operation in Ukraine? Okay, so Dagestan is the biggest, in terms of population, republic of the North Caucasus. Dagestan has been known for its plurality.
So in contrast to the neighboring Republic of Chechnya, you still had some kind of limited freedom in this country because it's a multi-ethnic republic, right? So expressing protest, expressing dissent doesn't really pay off in this country, but it's still possible if you take the risks. If you do this in Chechnya, it's very likely that people, authorities, law enforcement would go not just against you, but would chase down your family members as well. In Dagestan, you can still do this. Dagestanis have seen very serious rates of mobilization or recruitment into the Russian army fighting in Ukraine. I would say that some of them did this voluntarily, particularly at the beginning of the war, because you don't have a lot of opportunities. You don't have a lot of social elevators in this republic, this full republic. So what you would do as a youngster, having this culture of fighters, Highlander culture of honor, this warrior culture, some of them would possibly be motivated by these cultural issues or by money, some other things to go and fight in Ukraine. But what we've also seen is that the interest or the motivation of Dagestanis has decreased very dramatically over the course of the recent year. Nowadays, you don't have many people willing to go and fight in Dagestan. So people are afraid of expressing dissent in this republic against something that is not allowed by Moscow on the one hand. On the other hand, I would say that having been in touch with many Dagestanis, they're afraid of new waves of mass mobilization, which would have very dire consequences for Dagestanis. It's been noted, by the way, that ethnic minorities have seen more mobilization, ethnic minorities residing on the outskirts of the Russian Federation, more mobilization per capita than Russians or ethnic Russians living particularly in the central areas of the country.
Yeah,
so it's a big deal.
Let me bring in Katerina. We have the audio link fixed. Apologies for that earlier technical glitch. It's interesting because this issue of mobilization, because we focus so much on the fact that the Ukrainians are running short on manpower as we head into a third year of war. How hard can Vladimir Putin press when it comes to getting more troops from places like the North Caucasus?
That's a good question. And I think I was in the region a couple of months ago, and my feeling was that there's not too much pressure as of now in most of the North Caucasus republics, apart from Chechnya. Chechnya is the place where indeed there's very strong recruitment, there's forced recruitment, people have no way to escape or to abstain, and they sometimes are recruited several times. While in other republics like Dagestan, there is not that much pressure. If you don't want to go, you can avoid. There's a lot of corruption as well, so people just buy their ways out. But there's still quite a number of people who go and join because of the financial aspect. That's quite a poor region, and they're very socialists, exactly. And the government is paying pretty good money to those who go and fight.
So let me ask you, Katerina, we've been talking a lot for the last 3 weeks about can the U.S. Be able to spread itself thin when it comes to keeping an eye on what's going on in Ukraine, and now keeping an eye as well on what's going on in the Middle East. When you see the Russian president allowing a Hamas delegation to visit Moscow, championing the Palestinian cause, would you say that Russia also has the capability of keeping an eye on both regions at the same time?
I think the situation in the Middle East is a priority right now, and I think it's a very good chance for Vladimir Putin, or at least he sees it like this, because this is his chance to again show himself as a prominent player in the Middle East, to demonstrate his mediation capacity, maybe also to try to restore his reputation that was so badly damaged by the invasion of Ukraine. So I think he prioritizes now this raising his voice in support of civilians in Gaza speaking of the Western double standards. So he's basically trying to win the hearts of the Muslims around the world, of the people in the global South, and to kind of present himself as a anti-American leader.
Can it work though? I mean, won't the Muslim world remember that it's Russia that bombed hospitals in Syria?
I think it can partially work. From what I see, even on social media in places like Dagestan, including some Islamist channels. Today, for instance, they were posting the video of a video appeal of Palestinian children to Putin, asking him to defend the Palestinian people who are subjected to this massive violence. So, of course, many people will have reservations, but I think this can be pretty successful strategy.
Vladislav Davidson, if you hark back all the way to the Soviet period, relations between Russia and Israel have been testy at times. There's been highs and lows.
Sure.
Is this, how low a low is it this time?
This is a low in the post-Soviet period. Certainly, this is 32 years since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Things have never been this bad between the Jewish state, Israel, and Russia. Russia obviously has a web of relationships. I've written about this in Tablet and other places with Arab states, the Iranians, the Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Jews and the Israelis, who all of whom they have good relationship with, and they're the only ones who are capable of doing this for various reasons. But now with the war in Ukraine not going as well for them as they'd like to have gone, they had to go all in on their transactional relationship and alliance with Iran in order to get munitions, in order to get past sanctions, in order to get the drones that they're using against Ukrainian cities and against Ukrainian battle formations. And they now need to pivot to the Iranians, and they now see themselves as fighting the combined West. So they've downgraded the relationship to Jerusalem, right? They've downgraded it, and they've returned to good old-fashioned, again, I was just talking about return to the 19th century in some ways, but they've returned to good old-fashioned Soviet bloc third worldism. And they often just rekindle those same relationships with those same parties, those same actors in the Middle East. So obviously, Israel is not happy about this. PM Netanyahu has had a relationship with Putin for a decade, which was mutually beneficial to both of them. Certainly, it's not playing out the way he wants it now.
And it's having domestic repercussions.
Sure.
Since October 7th, it's been getting testy between Kremlin propagandists on state television. Some of Firebrand presenter Vladimir Solovyov's Jewish panelists have been trading nasty barbs with others in the pro-Putin chattering classes. Putin confidant, the far-right ideologue Alexander Dugin, saying this was inevitable. The divide between the Jews who are loyal to Putin and the special military operation after the escalation in the Gaza Strip was inevitable. Is that just a bit of, theater when we see these rows that have been playing out on state television in Russia, or is there a real problem?
Look, I really don't I really don't want to be in the situation where I agree with like a debased member of the tribe like Solovyov. I mean, if we could still excommunicate people, I would if we could excommunicate people the way we excommunicated Spinoza, I would have Monsieur
Solovyov, who's also Jewish.
Yes, of course. Yes, he's a member of a tribe. Utter shame, by the way. Utter ashanda, as we say. If we could excommunicate him, I would. And I don't want to agree with Monsieur Dugin, who's a total fascist either. And yet, there are obviously cleavages in the regime, and Russian Jews should have left on February of last year.
Right, but is this just a bit of TV banter?
Yeah, the fascist anti-Semite has a point.
Or is there a real problem for Vladimir Putin here?
He has a real problem. He absolutely has a real problem with internal cleavages in the society, and he's going to have to make decisions. The fascist is right. I'm just saying, Dugin is a horrible, horrible person and an enemy of Ukraine. But he's not wrong when a guy like Solovyov, who, like many, a Jew who had to serve as the czar or serve as whoever was the Secretary General of the Communist Party, has internal contradictions between his loyalty to his Jewish roots and to the Russian state. And the Russian state, of course, is not a friend of the Jews at this moment, and we can see that in its
right. And many of the oligarchs under sanctions are Jews. Ukrainian-born billionaire Mikhail Friedman, who made his fortune in banking during the chaotic years when the Soviet Union fell apart, recently quitting London for Moscow, and a reported eye towards moving to Israel. Israel, where Roman Abramovich, the former owner of Chelsea, is. And again, this is part, just a quick word on this, Ekaterina Sokyrianskaya, the Putin way of operating. You have the military might, and around him there are these oligarchs, and the oligarchs are expendable.
In what sense you mean that they're expendable?
Well, if in this case, are they considered as loyal to Vladimir Putin, or are they considered as expendable?
Right. All right. I think they're unhappy with this situation, and definitely there are lots of signals that many people in the establishment are very unhappy with the current situation, and they would like it to play out differently. And particularly the Jewish oligarchs, who are, have business internationally, and they're much more probably globalized in their lifestyles and their modus operandi as well. And they want to remain part of the global world, which they can't be, being under sanctions and being on the side of Kremlin these days. So I guess when we speak about cleavages, there are definitely suspicions between different groups, and there have always been internal conflicts and infights, and probably the issue of loyalty is an important one on the agenda, and the loyalty of the Jewish part of the establishment seen as a group may be representing as a threat to the other stronger supporters of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Kremlin is a kind of black box. So we don't really know what's happening inside, but we are guessing through the signals that are coming out of this black box.
Right. With us as well, by the way, joining our conversation from Istanbul, Tornike Gordadze, who is with the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Sorry to be late.
No problem. I hear Istanbul traffic is brutal. Back in. By the way, we've been talking about the war in the Middle East offers its challenges to Vladimir Putin. The same can be said for Ukraine's president. Back in May, Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Saudi Arabia. He appealed to Muslim solidarity at the Arab League summit in Jeddah, pointing to the persecution of Crimea's Tatar minority. Tornike, he's gone all in on the side of Israel in this one. Does he have as much of a problem as Putin does with war in the Middle East?
Zelensky made lots of efforts, not only with different Arab states, but also with what is called now the Global South. He also, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Kuleba, traveled a lot in Africa, in Asia. The problem with the Global South was the following. They never considered the war in Ukraine as something important for them, and they considered this as a intra-European, inter-Western problem. And very often, myself, when I was confronted with different audiences in different conferences, people from the Middle East or Africa were telling me, yes, it's great that the West is helping Ukraine, but they are helping Ukraine because Ukraine is part of the West, part of Europe. And the problem that was immediately coming then, example of the Palestinians. And it was like automatic. The Palestinian issue was mentioned not only by the Arabs, but all the other representatives of the Global South, telling me, look, that's great. The West is helping Ukraine, but why they never helped Palestinians? But there is another issue.
Let me just pick up on that point, Dornike. Should Volodymyr Zelensky have hedged a little more after October 7th, or did he do the right thing, going all in on the side of Israel?
I think he did the right thing because he understood for all this, a year and a half that there was not the countries from the south were supporting the resolutions, the UN resolutions about Ukrainian, the territorial integrity, because all of them respect this fundamental issue of territorial integrity, but they were not going further. And Zelensky and probably his advisors understood that that was the maximum they could get from maximum support they could get from the south and from different Arab countries. And there was an opportunity to get more support from Israel, who is under attack and who saw now that Russia is not really supporting Israel and is getting closer and closer with Israel's number one enemy, Iran. And so far as Israel was, let's say, neutral in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Zelensky tried to give more incentives or more opportunities to Israeli leadership to get more pro-Ukrainian and to help Ukraine more in terms of different types of support, including military support in terms of military equipment or some specific equipment. Yes, so I think he was right to try. We will see the consequences if it works.
Yeah, Israel, like we were saying earlier, always careful to keep those lines of communication open with Moscow, even during the Cold War when Russia was championing the Palestinians. Back in 2018, in Russia's May 9th Victory Day celebrations, there you see Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu striding alongside Vladimir Putin, holding the picture of Soviet Jewish Red Army Colonel Wolf Walensky. This is at the March of the Immortals that takes place each May 9th. You may have noticed, yes, it is Alexander Vučić, the president of Serbia, who's also in the frame there. Those days are in the past. Emil Aslan, this new world where you're on one side or the other, what do you think about it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question is now, it'd be unthinkable today to see at this point in time Netanyahu taking part in the March of the Immortals on May 9th in Moscow. What's your thoughts on the fact that you're in one camp or the other? You just heard Dornike describe how Ukraine has chosen its camp when it comes to the Middle East. So has Moscow, and vice versa when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, so that's true, but you cannot say the same thing about Israel because of the so many conflicts going on, so many battlegrounds, and Israel, even notwithstanding the current situation, I think it would not be interested in having its relations with Moscow going down. Absolutely, I think that the Jewish state would be willing to keep some sort of communication with Moscow, unless something very dramatic happens.
Vladislav Davidson, you agree?
Yeah, I agree with both those gentlemen, especially my pal Dornike, who I haven't seen in a bit. Hey, Dornike. Yeah, absolutely. This policy of neutrality is Netanyahu's pride and joy. He considered it to be a personal asset and a national asset. That is his relationship with the gangster with nukes who runs Russia, Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I'm beginning to think you don't like the Russian president.
Yes. As a fellow Vlad, I don't like him. Obviously, I don't. Netanyahu went all in on that relationship. It played out well for him. He kept Israel, for the most part, out of being dragged into the Iranian Axis Shia-Sunni civil war in Syria. He, in all his campaigns, in all his many prime ministerial campaigns, he showed himself to be a master statesman. And so,
well, Russia gave Israel to this day, they've never interfered when Israel has bombed in Syria like they've done in the last 3 weeks.
Not only not interfered, actually, it requires them to power down the S-300 and S-400 anti-missile systems. They have to actually, when the deconflicting mode happens, they have to power down the air defenses so that the IDF can fly in and bomb stuff. So it's been a mutually beneficial relationship. I think it's time for Israel, personally, that's my personal opinion, I think it's time for Israel to take a side in this. I think neutrality is a bad thing. I've written op-eds.
But does that mean they won't be able to go bomb in Syria afterwards?
Look, Russia also allows Hezbollah guys to wear Russian uniforms when they ask it for. Also, they're not friends. They're opportunist allies of convenience, right? And I think the IDF can at this point take its chances with 2 American aircraft carriers off of the of a Gulf off of Lebanon. So I really think it's time for Israel to take a stance. As a Ukrainian Jew, as a Jew, as someone whose mother was in Ashkelon when October 7 happened, I think it's time for Israel to take a stance.
We have a situation where we heard Thornike Gordadze earlier talking about the global south. India bills itself as a champion of the global south, but its leadership immediately rushed to Israel's defense after October 7th, and possibly for domestic reasons, with tweets of support from the president and the prime minister. You have even a BJP member of the Legislative Assembly in Karnataka state casually noting that India may face the situation that Israel is confronting today if we don't stand up to politically motivated radicalism. A dog whistle message that the Hindu nationalist BJP doesn't like the Muslim minority in many instances and is always talking up the threat of Islamist terrorism. And again, it's that broader issue of the world seeing both the war in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East through the prism, perhaps, of religion. Ekaterina Sokaryanskaya, your thoughts on how the two feed each other in a perhaps toxic way, these two conflicts?
I do see in the Russian context, at least, very interesting reactions. Indeed, we see this ugly event in Dagestan, in Makhachkala, the outburst of emotions of angry crowd on the one hand, religiously motivated and anti-Semitic. And then another quite surprising thing is the reaction of the rest of Russia, who condemned what happened, and the social media, is this boost of anti-Islamic sentiment. Really very strong, very aggressive, very orientalist, downgrading, representing people as monkeys, a lot of hatred. So it's very polarizing, and I think there's quite a lot of aggression on both sides, and it's really getting harder for the different parts supporting different parties to talk to each other.
Emil Aslan, how do you explain this surge in nativism?
Yeah, so these are tough times indeed. So, what's been going on in Israel and around have polarized a lot of people. You have to take sides. I've been seeing this in the Czech Republic as well. A huge rise of anti-Arab sentiments on the one hand, anti-Islamic sentiments, and then you have also a segment of Czech society which goes against Israel and against Jews. So we've been having this latent anti-Semitism over here for some time. It's not as aggressive as in some neighboring countries like in Poland or even in Slovakia, but it's still in here. So what's been happening in Israel, I think it's given impetus to this new polarization, people taking sides. And yeah, so we've seen this ugly face of anti-Semitism over here as well. So I'm a person of Sephardic Jewish descent myself. I don't know whether I should be talking about this, but my father, who recently started keeping kippah, wearing kippah, he was verbally abused a couple of days ago on the streets of Prague. This never happened in Prague, which is known to be quite peaceful, and no pogroms have happened in this country. No incidents. No, there have been some incidents, but it's not a big deal. So all of a sudden, this is back, and the Jewish community is going through this all over again, and it has surprised a lot of people. And I can say, having some friends from Arab countries and from the Middle East, not necessarily with Arab descent, that their situation has worsened as well, because a lot of Czechs, they put the blame on the people of Middle Eastern physique, of Middle Eastern looks, and life for them has become tougher as well.
We've seen Tornike Gordadze in this country, a rise in the number of anti-Semitic acts. We've also heard a far-right politician over the weekend falsely claiming that anti-Semitism was imported by Muslim immigrants. What's it been like in your native Georgia?
Before going to Georgia, I would say a word about Russia. And I see that there is a permanent tension in Russia, in Russia's double nature as nation, as imperial nation and as nation of the Russians, of ethnic Russians. In Northern Caucasus, the last decades, the Russians were not looking for some more moderate Islam or more integrated Islam, but Russia was looking for a loyal Islam. And we saw people like Kadyrov or some Dagestani leaders being much more radical than those who were fighting Russia in the 90s for Chechen independence. And that was accepted by the Kremlin leadership as far as these people were loyal to Russia. Russian leadership was not interested, is not interested in fighting radicalism, but they are interested in loyalty. So some of the most radical Islamists were tolerated as far as they were loyal to the empire. That's why we can see this kind of sad events going on in Dagestan, and the biggest anti-Charlie Hebdo rally having place in Chechnya a few years ago. Now back to Georgia. Georgia, most of people are quite. The opinion is quite pro-Israeli because they consider that Israel is part of the West, even if Israel is very discreet and very neutral in Georgia's problems with Russia. Its people are just sympathetic to Israel because they believe that it's part of the global West. There's some pro-Palestinian opinions, but they are still a minority. But there's a new tendency also among some leftist, young, but quite comparable to what happens in Europe. But they are not a majority. It's a part of the urban society. Some students who recently discovered anti-imperial, anti-colonial, and this kind of literature, and they feel like they feel solidarity with Palestinians. But in general, people are quite they see the division between what is West and what is not the West, and they see that Russia also taking sides for the Palestinians. So it's quite like Pavlovian reaction also. So people...
Pavlovian reaction. Just very briefly, because we're running short on time.
Yes, sir.
Vladislav Davidson, you heard Tornike talk about Russia wanting a loyal Islam. Same can be said for a loyal Judaism and a loyal Orthodox Church.
Absolutely, absolutely. Russia is and historically has been a multiracial, multi-confessional empire held together through centralized force, right? And the Orthodox Church is obviously a arm of a state run by basically the entire clerisy or KGB guys. You have when Putin came to power, he destroyed obviously the Chechen uprising, which both the liberal and the Islamist wing of it, and he co-opted them, and he got rid of the old Jewish elites and Jewish oligarchs. He put in his own Jewish elites and his own Jewish oligarchs in. So that's absolutely right. I went to see Mr. Friedman, Monsieur Friedman, in his office a month before the war started in London, letter one. You know, it was obvious that this is a man who is sitting on two chairs. And one of the great things about this war is that the hypocrisy of so many people, Orthodox, Muslim, or Christian, who have money and who are able to live in London and keep their families in London and live well in the West, can no longer pretend that they're both on the side of Western civilization and also be corruptioneers in Russia. And
Mikhail Friedman, who can no longer stay in London, according to the latest news. Vladislav Dagestan.
Yes, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank as well Emil Islan for being with us from Prague, Ekaterina Sokirianskaya and Tornike Gordadze from Istanbul. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.